Hey guys, Anime Gypsy here with another manga review. This time I am reviewing Tezuka's masterpiece Dororo. And Dororo, in my perspective, it's just so phenomenal. It gets a 9 out of 10 in my scaling. It by far is one of the better pieces I have ever read in my entire life. And I'm really looking forward to reviewing more of this stuff online because I just love analyzing this stuff and I love providing the information that I have learned from analyzing this to you guys, the audience. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump right in. In terms of the material, if I had to describe Dororo in as few words as possible, I would say Dororo is a cross between a epic and a folk tale in manga form. And honestly, the reason I'm saying this is because it has all of the implications of an epic, it has all of the implications of folklore, and let's analyze this one by one. Folklore, it's basically tales passed down from generation to generation throughout the years, and they actually have common tropes, as a mythologist called Joseph Campbell wrote in a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And if you read this book, it was written in the 40s, and it's basically a guide to the commonalities found within hero tales in folklore specifically, and also, what makes them good, and it describes the values behind those books. And if you read it from a author's perspective, it becomes a guide to how to recreate folklore. And in a way, this is what we have in Dororo. It's almost as if Tezuka read that book. I was like, okay, I'm gonna recreate folklore, and it's like, all right, I'm gonna do it. And a good example of this common tropes found in folklore are that the main protagonist of the tale is usually a prince. Now, this Dororo, specifically this manga, focuses on references to specific tales told in religious texts and folklore in general. The tale and mythology as well. Now, an example of this is Hyakimaru, the main character, the main protagonist, as a baby, was drifted on a basket on a river and went upstream. This is a explicit reference to Moses in the biblical texts and the Quranic texts, basically the Abrahamic faiths. Now, you'll find references like this all over. And another reference. This is a reference to mythology. There's a scene in which Dororo and Hyakimaru arrive at a place, and Hyakimaru is rowing the boat to a place that is basically the equivalent of hell in this novel. And this is a direct reference to the river Styx, and it even says so in the author's notes in the manga. And you see this again and again as you start reading. Now, the reason this is not only directly related to folklore, but also related to epics, is because epics are more hero-focused, they're more poetic, therefore they contain metaphors. And this book definitely does contain metaphors about gender, about war, about life, about victimization. This is very heavy material. This isn't light stuff. This isn't a light. Does this look like a light read to you? No. This is amazing. This by far is one of the better books I have ever read, except for the ending. I'm gonna get there when I get there. Now, there are certain criteria necessary for an epic. There are mainly three. The first one is that the epic must be focused on a specific hero. We see that a most prominent example of this is the Tale of Gilgamesh, the epic of Gilgamesh, so to speak, that was written in between the Tigris and the Euphrates, in that area, in the Sumerian language, Sumerian language, way back in the day. And the other criteria is that there has to be a journey to the underworld. Again, a good example of that is Hercules. In his epic, travels to the underworld multiple times and sees Hades, yada yada yada. And the third is basically the hero defeats a monster or a warrior. A example of that is Gawain and the Green Knight, but he doesn't really defeat Gawain doesn't really defeat the Green Knight, but that's just an example. So you get the point. You see a hero, there's a trip to the underworld. It's basically adventure based. This is very important. Epics are usually adventure based. They're basically in the adventure genre automatically, like this, because you have places that they explore, yada yada yada, and it's the same thing here. It's set in medieval Japan, and it's a new world for them. They're exploring new environments. They're getting to find out more about the harsh realities of the world, and also the way the world works, and also new places, yada yada yada, new customs, so on and so forth. Now, there's also, so this aside, now that I've explained the folklore aspect and the epic aspect of Dororo, next I will talk about the Japanese folklore type elements, the Japanese mythology in this manga, and there's a lot of it. There are a lot of references to Japanese mythology. You have a nine-tailed fox, you have the Onis, you have spirits, the spirit of death, which is again related to Shintoism, which is a religion in Japan, and then you have a cursed sword, which is something that you see a lot of stories about when it comes to the the Edo period, yada yada yada, famous swordsmen, cursed swords, people that died because they bought the swords that were so sharp, they forced people to kill people, drive people to madness, and those are stories told in a lot of Japanese myths, Japanese legends, yada yada yada. So you have this type of thing here, and you also have the new. And this is stuff that's also been used later on in anime. So the new, you might say, oh, this is a unique creature that we haven't seen before. If you watch Boruto, it's actually the summoning of Sumire. It's the product of the Gozo Tenno, and it's actually, I think, was a subject in the latest episode of Boruto as well. Coincidentally enough, I'm making this video now, and the new was the final villain, final antagonist of the story. Now, the nine-tailed fox, obviously, there's a lot of references to that, from Sonic the Hedgehog, with tails, who only has two tails, but it's a reference to the nine-tailed fox. You have the nine tails in Pokemon, you have a nine-tails in Naruto, Kurama, so it's something that you see used in materials over and over again, so in and of itself, it's not unique, but the way that it's been executed, those creatures have been executed, where they're very one-dimensional, in a way, is unique in and of itself. They're bad creatures, and you might say, oh, that's a critique because villains have to be two-dimensional. Well, I think part of the overall message of Dororo is that there's a certain flow of nature, and everyone has their place. Everyone has their place in nature. Demons, their place is in the netherworld, and wherever you go after you die. That's where demons belong. So if demons were on Earth, that's a problem. That's a problem. So not only is Hyakimaru, in a sense, regaining his body parts back by defeating the demon, he is restoring order. And that is something I think I kind of caught on to a bit in the middle of the manga, and it's a trend that I keep seeing over and over again in a lot of books, not just this, but again, I think it was executed perfectly because it wasn't explicitly mentioned, and it's just through reading it and realizing through bits and pieces that this is what that means. So I think that was executed well in my perspective, because if it's made clear, it kind of becomes irrelevant in my perspective. Now, yeah, of course, sword, the Oni. All right. Moving on to the narrative structure of this story. You have amazing flashbacks, amazing stories being told, but those stories are directly relevant. The backstories are directly relevant to the story that's being told at hand. This is stuff. This is stuff that is important for the overall story, and it's not like useless backstory that we won't need, and it doesn't delve very deep in the backstory. So in terms of narrative structure and the way it's been constructed, and this event leads to this event, leads to this event, leads to this event, he gets this, he gets that, he gets an eye, he gets an ear, he gets a nose, he gets a leg, he gets an arm. So yeah, I think it fits. I think it fits. It's a pretty nice narrative structure. You always know where you are. There isn't a useless moment. And even the moments that some people might say are useless, in my perspective, are used to build characterization between characters. So, I think the narrative structure was great. I give the narrative structure a 9.5 out of 10, somewhere in that range. And flashbacks. There have been two main flashbacks in the story. Hyakimaru. Hyakimaru's flashback, in my perspective, gets a 10 out of 10 because it's very unique. Body parts missing, all that jazz. I honestly think it's a very unique story, and it deserves praise because of its uniqueness, so to speak. Now, Dororo's backstory, in my perspective, it's more tragic, but it's not as unique. And some people might say you could almost see through it. A lot of it, the very end where he goes ham on the sound, no, that part, my perspective, wasn't that predictable, but the beginning of Dororo's flashback was somewhat predictable. And that's why I gave it a 9 out of 10, because even though it was predictable, it was executed well. And it really did give the audience the feels. So it's not as good as Hyakimaru's flashback, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's executed well. Now, other stories in Dororo that I think are worth mentioning is the guy that was in charge of the two sharks. I think that story it's messed up, but it being messed up also brings an element to the story about, human beings and their obsessions and how they could be obsessed with something that isn't them because they realize that they're weak, stuff like that. I think the weakest story is the story where Surame, that one guy, loved the moth lady demon, and because they kind of negate a point in that story, and that point that they negate is they keep talking about, that she's a demon, again, reference back to the flow of nature, but they mention that, I don't know how to explain it, but it's almost like they're negating their point when they talk about people, because at the very end, they got kicked out of the village. They got kicked out of the village. And Dororo says people don't understand what is different from them, what is unique, something along those lines. And in a way, you could apply this to the demon that was vanquished. So if that scene at the very end when Hyakimaru and Dororo were kicked out of the village because of their deeds, if that didn't happen, then that would have been a lot better. In my perspective, that would have been a lot better. And the reason I'm saying this is because you can't negate your point directly after you've made it, where everything just needs to be in its own place. And Hyakimaru says she's a demon, she's evil, she's most definitely evil because she's a demon, keeps repeating that, but then at the very end he gets kicked out because people don't understand the way that he actually is, because it's a unique case, similar to the demon and her love to Sumire. Now you could say that demon was evil because he killed the children, yeah, but I think overall that point was negated, and that was one of the few gripes I had with this novel, but it's a very big novel, so that really doesn't count that much, because I think it's one of the shorter stories in the arc as well, so in the book as well. So I'm really not that hung up on it, but I just thought I'd bring it up since I'm critiquing this and raving at the same time, because it's awesome. It is awesome. Awesome sauce. I loved it. I love it. I love it. Okay, so let's move on to characterization. Now, Hyakimaru's characterization, it basically goes along the lines of the most important thing. The first aspect of his characterization is realizing that if he doesn't stop looking at himself as the victim, he will never move forward. And that, again, is emphasized with the blind monk he meets. And I'm wondering if that blind monk is a reference to the Sohei of Japan, which were warrior monks, warrior Buddhist monks that existed in Japan and were pretty fierce. I wonder if that monk was a reference to the Sohei. But that aside, he realized, and this is important character development for Hyakimaru. I think it's the biggest aspect of character development in the series, along with the trans stuff with Dororo. Now, Hyakimaru in Dororo, Hyakimaru initially thinks that he is basically a victim. He can't go anywhere. He is useless. He can't see. Oh, whoa, my tragedy is huge. That sort of deal. He basically victimized himself. And it's, to be fair, we haven't lived this life. Imagine not having eyes, ears, or a nose or a mouth, or not being able to sense anything, using some sort of external pressure to sense where everything is. Now, yeah, that is tragic, but he learned basically that if he stops thinking about this stuff, he could move forward, as the monk taught him. Now, another aspect of characterization is he starts to understand the importance of bonds, especially the one he makes with Dororo. Him understanding that type of bond. Oh, actually, wait. Let me go back to the victimization thing, because I'm just going to make a direct parallel. It's the same thing with Naruto initially, in the very beginning. When Naruto first was like, when he first started before the series, Naruto before the series would always victimize himself and always cry, and then eventually he started realizing that if he keeps doing that, he won't become Hokage, he won't be recognized, so he moves forward. And remember that speech that Naruto gave to that one kid in the Zabuza arc, whose father died because he rebelled against Genzo? Remember that speech where he's like, so are you going to live the victim role your entire life? That's basically what Hyakimaru realized. Now, moving forward, another aspect of Hyakimaru's characterization, character development, is basically the fact that he has realized the value of his bond with Dororo. And yeah, first he tries to ditch him a few times, and it doesn't work, and he starts realizing that, yeah, he basically sees him as a brother, so it's an important bond. Now, Dororo. In terms of characterization for Dororo's characterization really, and character development, how should I say this? Okay, so you have two things. The first one is trust, and the other thing is the I'm going to start with trust. Trust. So when it comes to trust in Dororo simply didn't have the privilege of being able to trust anyone he sees, especially after he saw someone like Itachi betray his father. Of course, I'm not talking about, the legend Itachi, I'm not talking about Itachi Uchiha, I'm talking about a schmuck Itachi that is, in this novel. Now, that sort of deal, that sort of issue really does leave a mark on a kid where he basically has a hard time trusting people. And you start realizing that sort of thing when he's like, don't touch me, why did you touch me, brother? At first, I thought it was, a whole, rape backstory was inevitable, but then we got his backstory and we found out that there was no such thing. So I basically started connecting the dots, and I was like, okay, so it's more of a trust issue, and it's more of an issue of the map on his back, which we will get to when we discuss the ending, because again, I didn't like the ending that much. So when it comes to that sort of thing, you start realizing that he starts trusting Hyakimaru more. He shows Hyakimaru the map. Well, more like Hyakimaru sees the map whether he liked it or not. So basically that trust was built over time in this amazing manga. And that's basically the trust aspect of the characterization. Now let's talk about trans stuff. This is the thing. This is the thing about Tezuka. Tezuka's foresight. His foresight is otherworldly. This guy, Tezuka, wrote a manga, Astro Boy. And in that manga, robots and human beings had the same equal rights. Meanwhile, in American movies and a lot of other manga that came out later and anime that came out later, you had a lot of issues concerning, okay, this is the struggle between man and machine, machines are... And yeah, so basically the same story and narrative that we see in movies like Ghost in the Shell, movies like Blade Runner, that whole thing, man versus machine, that whole spiel. That whole spiel is a struggle between man and machine in which they don't have equal rights, in which The machine is basically struggling to gain equal recognition as live sentient beings as humans. On the other hand, in Astro Boy, another one of Tezuka's works, you have basically someone, the kid Astro, who grew up in a society in which it was already a given that man and machine had human rights and were sentient and were both alive. That's foresight. That's the, that's unbelievable, especially for something written in the 60s like Dororo. And here, it's no different because Tezuka talks about gender identity here in depth. He really does. Dororo's aspect and characterization, it comes to him finding out that he's actually a girl from Itachi and then from Hyakimaru. He replies by saying, "I'll throw poop at you if you leave me," or something of the sort, because of what's going on now. Now, that is the least feminine response I've ever heard. I know some of you might say, "Oh, but he blushed here and there. That was an indication that he's kind of leaning to the feminine direction." But I would disagree, because if you look at the actions of Dororo, they don't equate the gender roles or norms of women in Edo Japanese society. They do not. They don't. And I doubt that the thieves that because this is the thing, Itachi only found out that Dororo is a girl after stripping him naked. So he doesn't look like a girl. He doesn't sound like a girl. And he was told his entire life that he was a boy. And I'm guessing after this response that he's deciding to stay a boy because, he was raised this way. He thought he was a boy his entire life. So, that sort of spiel. Now, here you have a protagonist that has this sort of characterization that would violate social norms, aka being transgender. And yeah, I think that is a challenge. I think it was made as basically something to say, hey, it's okay if you think that way. Look at this character. He thinks that way, and he's a protagonist. Now, one of the reasons I hated the ending is because one of the last things Hyakimaru says to Dororo is, next time I see you, I want you to be dressed like a girl. And I was like, dude, come on. And I get why he did this, because conservatism in Japan may be high and stuff like that may have not been acceptable in the 1960s. I totally understand why he did this. He did this as a projection of a more conservative voice, where Hyakimaru projects a conservative voice, while Dororo projects a more modern voice. And that's what I'm getting at, basically, when it comes to this issue. And also, actually, throughout the entire story, because if you see Hyakimaru, he has a deeper understanding of demons, spirits, yada yada yada. And if you see Dororo, he has a deeper understanding of social skills, of being able to trick people. Again, social skills, which always relate to the modern, because basically, if social norms change all the time, and when they change, you need to adjust your strategy in order to trick people and make relationships, yada yada yada. So, in my perspective, Dororo is more modern. Hyakimaru is more, old school, conservative, basically. And it's basically showing you that, yeah, you could be friends despite those differences. And something else that I've realized reading the book. I mean, this book is like, these pages don't do justice to the material in the book. Like, every few pages is stacked with material. Like, this book may be this small, but the material this book contains is, like, you wouldn't guess just by looking at this, because it's a lot more than this. Because each page is stacked full of stuff, basically, is what I'm trying to say. I could make a 2-hour video about this, but I won't. And the reason I won't is because I'm going to end my video here because it's getting too long. But first, I'm going to talk about the ending. 2 reasons why I hated the ending. You heard the first one, the trans issue, and the second one is basically this. Wouldn't it make more sense if Hyakimaru and Dororo continued to search for Dororo's father's treasure instead of leaving Dororo with a bunch of random farmers in a bunch of random place in a random place that they've landed in? It just doesn't make sense. It does not make sense whatsoever, and that's why I disagree. Now, if you like this video and you stayed and you stayed on this video for this long, kudos to you. I really like you. Please subscribe to my channel to see more content. I will be making content relating to One Piece, relating to Boruto, relating to Hunter x Hunter, relating to what else? Oh, My Hero Academia. So if you like those series, subscribe down below. Until next time, guys. This is Anime Gypsy, and I'm out. See you guys later. Bye.